Hi, I'm Ellen Donoghue, and this is Your Ardent Nature, a YouTube channel in which we explore mindfulness practices and teachings that really help us anchor in our sense of aliveness. The last couple of videos, I've been unpacking a bit about what I mean by anchoring in your aliveness, and I expect it will be unique to each person on this planet. But fundamentally, we're talking about aspiring to cultivate inner strengths of a variety of types. We'll delve into that more in a little bit, while simultaneously reducing any habitual tendencies we may have towards doubt, judgment, overcriticism, anxiety. These are all fear-based tendencies. We'll be diving into fear today, one of my favorite four-letter F words, if I can say that. And then we also are looking for ways where just our habitual tendencies, our reactive tendencies, where we might be able to release some of their habitual drive. And we can really explore other ways where we may react. When we are feeling more empowered by having the inner strengths and reducing some of the things that just aren't working for us and reducing the grips of anxiety, fear, doubt, and judgment, then we may feel more inclined to pursue our wholesome, heartfelt aspirations, whatever those may be. And then we may open up as we begin to connect more with the natural world, really appreciating our interconnectedness. We may open up to then offering our unique gifts, because everyone has unique gifts and skills on behalf of some aspect on life on planet Earth, whether it's 1 hour a month or we're dedicating our entire profession, career, or lifestyle towards contributing to the well-being of planet Earth. What seems to be happening is as you do become more empowered, you feel more alive, awake, resourced, as Rick Hansen likes to talk about it, inner resource, then you do become more opening to providing service, collaborating, and all these really wonderful things to improve life on this planet. So let's just dive into a bit more of, this is part one, and there will be part 2 or 3 coming down in a few days or in a week or so. But I want to recap what we've always putting up on these presentations. What I've gleaned as 4, there's many more, there's probably dozens, if not hundreds, of key tenets of mindfulness. And I've identified 4 from various experts in Buddhist psychology and mindfulness meditation practitioners that really do seem to rise to the top. And the first one is the sense of being able to enhance our awareness of where our mind is resting, how it is inclined. Because if we're letting this mind just go on autopilot, that's when, and we're not really aware of that, where that pilot is captaining the ship or the plane or the vessel of our body, then things can happen and feel kind of out of control. And it can feel as though life is happening to us rather than us actually creating life around us. So the first step, that fundamental piece, is simply being more aware of how the mind is inclined, and then finding that pause that then allows us to choose, maybe I really don't need to feel anxious in this moment, or maybe I don't need to react with anger to what that person said. If we know that our mind is revved up or inclined in doubt in that moment, then it helps us be more aware of how our reactive tendencies might come in, and we can be more empowered to choose our reaction or choose how we engage or respond to individuals, groups, experiences, etc. The other key tenet is quieting our mind. This is essential and seems really related to then living fully. When that mind is going off in all kinds of directions, often referred to as monkey mind, I think of it as one of these wonderful Pixar animated films, and I have this image of a vacuum cleaner, and it's just sucking up everything in this animated world, kind of going crazy and wild. And that's what can happen when our nervous system is really revved up. And I do respect and appreciate that the last year in particular has really revved up many of the nervous systems out there, understandably. And so as we quiet the mind, however the various methods one may choose, we can explore that if needed to cultivate stillness, then wonderful things can happen. Our awareness then increases, and we are less reactive. When the nervous system is overstimulated, we do default into what's often referred to as the ego mind. And I don't mean the egotistical, arrogant mind. I mean the part of us that just always has to be figuring things out, has to compartmentalize. Oh, that person said that, so they must be that. Or I know if I just replay that conversation with my neighbor or loved one or coworker a bunch of times over, in other words, rumination, I know I'll figure out something new. That is what the overstimulated ego mind tends to want to do, kind of just ruminating, fixating on certain things. And that does often lead to a lot of people feeling stuck. They may not realize that it's actually overstimulation that's causing them to feel stuck. But in many ways, that is what does end up happening. So then we simultaneously recognize or create sensations that help us grow, inner strengths that we choose to grow. And then the final one is really kind of the big ticket. And it comes from all these things intersecting in a wonderful way, where we do find we get to choose how we react to anything. And I do mean anything that comes to us in life. The wonderful sensations and our celebrations and joyful moments, as well as the disappointments and sadness, to know that we get to choose how we react to any of them. So stepping back a little bit more into what do we mean by cultivating inner strengths of our choosing? There's so many, right? But we might want to think about choosing to cultivate strengths where we have a void or a deficit of some type. And again, we have to enhance our awareness to really assess in what area am I feeling a deficit of an inner strength? And it may be a momentary or a couple hours of a deficit. It may be triggered by some event or situation, or it could be something you've had a deficit of for some time, weeks, months, maybe years, maybe a lifetime. So inner strengths are numerous. There is a whole seed bed, which is why I put this image here of inner strengths out there. And we can then choose which one we want to cultivate and nurture. So it could be from calm, ease, contentment, joy, gratitude. It also could be in the spectrum of grit. I love growing grit and the topic of growing grit, determination, perseverance, doggedness, being ardent. In other words, as I always ask, what is your ardent nature? And to what do you want to pursue that passion that you have? So those are some inner strengths. Others may be resilience, equanimity. So really building that ability to rebound after setbacks. Because setbacks, upsets, disturbances, sorrows, and losses are a part of this life. And feeling fed by life rather than drained by it, which is another way to frame anchoring in your aliveness, does include both the positive ways that life feeds us. We can all list a huge range of positive ways life feeds us, but it's also allowing those bumps in the road to feed us in some ways. And I'm not saying, please be clear on this, I'm not echoing the tendency, particularly in the culture where I grew up, the American culture, of just pick yourself up, get on with it, or the really hard things, difficult things in life make you stronger, or just lift yourself up by your bootstraps. That is not what I mean by the difficulties, sorrows, losses, betrayals, upsets in feeding our life. I'm not meaning that. I'm meaning really embracing those experiences. This is why this series is really called The Power of Our Courageous Hearts to Reframe Fear. It is about embracing the things that are difficult and challenging in ways that work best for you. And we'll explore some ways in these talks so that they are actually being part of growth. They will always be a memory of sorrow and loss and disappointment, absolutely. But we're not going to just brush them under the carpet, or we're not going to say, hey, just get better. You can do better than that. There's a lot of psychological research that does demonstrate that overvocal inner critic, that voice that's saying, you can do it better, you can, really harsh, that tends to whip, prod, poke us. It tries to blame us or shame us into changing our behavior. There's a lot of evidence in psychological research suggesting that has zero value at all, that type of harsh inner self-talk. So we're trying to explore ways to switch over to very self-nurturing, self-compassionate, self-care, self-talk when we are inclined or in a way that maybe doesn't feel so great because of an upset, disturbance, betrayal, or a loss. So today we are going to delve into this topic of fear, and we're going to explore it in a little bit of depth, using, of course, our wildlife and natural world friends to help us illuminate some points. please keep in mind when I'm talking about the neuroscience and the psychology, the Buddhist psychology behind some of these concepts I'm bringing up. And yet I'm showing pictures of animals. I'm not trying to say there's a one-on-one relationship there. I'm allowing the natural world to kind of anchor us in the possibilities, to think a little bit more broadly and creatively about our own human well-being of our mind, our body, our spirit. So why is it that humans can feel so entrenched in fear? Well, there's two ways we're going to talk about that here. One of them will be the evolutionary legacy of our nervous system. We are talking about 500 million years in the development of the nervous system, back when there was probably just a cell or two of an organism out there and a nervous system was developing. We can't just go back to the 60 million years as the development of our hominid and primate ancestor nervous system. We really have to go back quite far. And as one of my mentors, Dr. Rick Hansen, often describes, millions of years ago, the name of the game really was eat lunch today and don't be someone else's lunch. And so survival was that driver. And now through evolution and many years later, we still have that legacy of, oh my gosh, I have to survive, which may not be serving us very well in a lot of modern or contemporary situations for humans, but that legacy exists. The good news is that that tendency for us with our minds and our brains to tip towards the negative, often referred to as a negativity bias, which is part of this evolutionary legacy, we can actually use mindfulness practices to rewire our brains and tilt it in a more positive direction of our choosing. So that's great possibility and evidence that we know from neuroscience that actually the brain is more flexible than maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago we thought was the case. And the second aspect of why fear is so entrenched for so many of us does actually come from our lifetime of conditioning, whether it's our family of origin or society culture where we grew up in, situations, usually when we are quite younger, but it often can expand to the rest of our lives. And that then often creates habitual thought processes or reactive tendencies that become very habituated. So we look for ways where we can try to reframe some of those. Again, I'm using wildlife images here just to kind of provide other perspectives on some of these points. And I'll allow you to use your creative side in many cases to see the reference here. And if it doesn't resonate for you, that is no problem. So when we're talking about fear, I absolutely recognize we're trying to integrate the natural world and to the extent we can, allow people to feel more connected, more comfortable, more part of the natural world. Humans are part of the natural world rather than thinking of it as a separate place or an entity. That we are fully integrated and allowing the mind and the brain, the whole body to feel that way. I still recognize that for some people, what may be a haven, walking into this landscape, for instance, may be actually a horror for other people, or a place in nature that may be a refuge to some people, maybe a situation that others would retreat from or recoil from, or a sanctuary for some may be quite scary for others. So I'm appreciating there's a whole spectrum of opportunities in the natural world and how people initially react to them. And then offering that there may be ways we can really grow and shift those. What we know from neuroscience, and I learned this from Rick Hansen, is that with the human brain and the human psyche, we know that about a third of the traits that we have are innate. They're kind of our hardwired tendencies. And that makes sense. However, about 2/3 of those traits are learned or they're experienced enough to be kind of more habitual traits or qualities. And that gives great opportunity. So 2/3 of the traits that we may aspire to grow, whether it's resilience, confidence, courage, ease, peace, these are things that we can actually improve on our own. We're not just born with them. And that says a lot for me. Now, in response to a few recommendations that I share a bit more about my background in these videos, and I don't want to take a lot of time to do that, I am going to share one little tidbit here related to the sensation of fear. I am a natural resource social scientist. I've also been a wilderness guide, and I do spend a lot of times in nature and wild places. I do need to be in a wild place pretty much every day, or else it's kind of like brushing your teeth or eating. You know, I can go a day or two maybe without that, but then I start really feeling depleted. So for me, the natural world has been integral. And I want to just point out that here in the United States, we are blessed with a designation called wilderness areas, designated, I believe, in 1964, the Wilderness Act. And thank you for all the champions of that wonderful designation. So wilderness areas are quite unique, and they're within other public lands, typically national forests, national parks, or other public land ownerships. And the reason I'm showing this is that this sign signifies when you're entering into a wilderness area. I often refer to as the Gumby sign, because if you notice, it always has this odd shape to it. They're always very rustic looking, and they are about a quarter, half mile, or a mile before you actually see the sign, because a wilderness area and a road, those two things don't happen together. Wilderness areas do not have road, at least they certainly haven't that I've experienced, and I think as designated by the Wilderness Act, they're not supposed to have roads. So it's really quite wonderful. And I want to just share that I don't recall the first time I saw this sign, because I've been in wilderness areas hundreds, if maybe thousands of times. So I don't recall, but I do know now, and for the last many number of years, that for me, I'm recognizing this isn't for everyone else, but for me, when I'm carrying my backpack and I'm heading into a wilderness area, the moment I see this sign and I cross this threshold, the boundary into the wilderness area, that apart from the sign, you don't really notice any difference necessarily. I feel like I'm coming home. So all those qualities of being home, comfort, ease, familiarity, relaxation, I think we all know what that's like. We come back home from a trip, a vacation even sometimes, or a business meeting that's been away. We come back to our home. And yes, I do enjoy that comfort of walls and a roof and windows and doors. And I appreciate that feeling of, I'm home. I can relax. This is familiar. I could be at ease. For me, that is most profoundly felt when I cross into a wilderness area. So I recognize that may not be the same for everyone else, but it is an opportunity to know that we can grow this, because I'm pretty sure the first time I did this, I wasn't feeling tremendous ease and comfort and familiarity. And I may not in certain wilderness areas. That may be quite different for me. I will have some initial hesitations, perhaps, and fears, but I do want to show evidence that we can reframe and grow our reaction to certain places in really drastically different ways. And for me, obviously, I have a sense of comfort in wild places that I'm sure I didn't have straight out of the nest, so to speak, as a young child. Okay, so now onto the topic more of fear. Psychologists, as far as I know, please correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes use the terms good fear and bad fear. I know there's probably a more sophisticated term. I just haven't been able to find it for two types of fear. So I'm going to reframe that a little bit, because I don't really like good and bad. I'm going to call it useful fear and not so useful fear. And the entire presentation we're talking about in this series on based on embracing our fears is about this not so useful fear. But it does mean I need to define that useful fear very briefly to provide context. So when we talk about useful fear, we are talking about the reactive mode, what Rick Hansen calls the red zone, when something happens and we need to react. And a lot of bodily functions happen at that time. So let's just use the strange example of a truck coming right at us down a 2-lane highway, let's say. We sense that. Our amygdala, ring, ring, ring in our brain, they set off a whole cascade of neurological, physiological effects for us, because we're seeing something that's really threatening and really challenging. So a lot of things happen. Some of them are blood goes to our big muscle groups. Some of our systems go offline temporarily. We really don't need to worry about digestion or reproduction in the moment. A lot of hormonal changes happen, whether it's cortisol or adrenaline. And that's what happens. We are able to react instantly. In the case I just made an example of a truck barreling down towards us, we then swerve out of the way. We react. Or another example, we're walking down a sidewalk and there's also a little toddler in front of us, and we see the toddler's about to approach an area where a car's backing up. So again, the reactive mode sets in. immediately we dive in, grab the child, and all is well. So the reactive mode is intended to be a short-term type of sensation, and it can be incredibly useful. Thus, I term it the useful fear. The challenge is that the human body, mind, spirit is not prepared to live always that way. We cannot always be in the reactive mode. It will absolutely deplete us and our other vital parts of our lives, whether it's the immune system, reproduction, digestion, just can't be offline for all that time. So what happens then is we tip into the not so useful fear, the fears that we allow to keep us triggered and activated. And we want to then really work on ways we can reframe, diminish, perhaps even dissolve some of these sensations attributed to this not so useful fear. So let's then go into that evolutionary legacy. 60 million primate hominid plus 500 million of nervous system development. Let's talk about that legacy and what it has predisposed us to. It has actually predisposed us to exaggerate threats. I'm going to encourage you to think about the comings and goings of today or tomorrow. Enhance your awareness for this, of how your perceptions of a threat might be, and kind of inquiring within, boy, am I exaggerating this? Is that rain cloud over there really going to absolutely ruin my afternoon jog or whatever it is you're doing? Just think about our tendency to exaggerate threats. Also, what I learned from Rick Hansen is that we do have a tendency to undervalue our capabilities. So we all have innate strengths. We all have some. We all have capabilities. We all have experiences that we've learned from. But when we are revved up in that reactive mode, when we are really caught up in fear, we tend to undervalue that. I actually know how to deal with this situation. When we are calm, content, feeling resourced, feeling empowered, feeling fully resilient, that provides opportunity for our innate strengths to be at the forefront of our perception. They are ready and willing to help us engage them in a time of potential threat, difficulty, or harm. We also tend to not recognize that situations change all the time when we are caught up in this not so useful evolutionary legacy of fear. And a very trivial example could be the weather. I'm fascinated by the fixation of weather that Homo sapiens tend to have, and the desire that it needs to be a certain way to feel better or well or to be happier. And yet what we know, because people tease the poor weatherman and weatherwomen so often about those predictions not being accurate, we know situations change. So if we're fretting about the potential rain affecting our kids' various sporting events over the weekend, situations do change. And so that always be looking down the future for what this may be and being fearful of it is part of that reactive tendency that kind of gets a little bit stuck. And it is an area where we can really reframe some of that. We also tend to remember when things work out just fine. This is also fascinating. I do this, I know, as do many people, but that there's a lot of times that things work out, but the brain isn't necessarily hardwired to remember when things work out. So that's why these mindfulness practices help us go, that presentation went really well, or that dinner party with the meal I've never made before, that actually turned out pretty well. We have opportunities to reframe that hardwired tendency, that legacy, that bias that tips us into, gosh, I'm just remembering the things that didn't work. Just as a little example, how many times have we heard from ourselves or our friends or our neighbor colleagues the statement of, that turned out better than I thought, whether it's a dinner party or a presentation. It turned out better than I thought. Well, it can only mean one thing. We went in there predisposed to think it's not going to go very well. And that tells us a bit about the hardwiring of these beautiful brains. And I wish I could be here in a million years to see how Homo sapiens continue to evolve away from these fear-based hardwired tendencies. In addition, we have these brains that do tend to scan for bad news. And then we find it, we over-focus on it. Now that was great when there were saber-toothed tigers or other threats of massive sandstorms or whatever it may be, and there still may be hazards out there that are very real, but the constantly scanning may not be necessary in contemporary times. I want to pause for a second and offer an important caveat that I did want to mention earlier, and I apologize for that. that when I'm talking about these fear-based tendencies that are either hardwired, like the ones right now, or the ones that are more conditioned that we've just learned about and integrated into our habitual thought processes over time, I am not talking about the fear associated with a situation that an individual may be in that is truly fearful, that you're not safe in your living environment, or that you're feeling abuse or neglect from individuals or some situation. If you are in that situation, please do what you can to seek support, and that these teachings and practices I am offering here are really at a different level. So if anyone is in so much fear for their lives, their safety, their personal, emotional, and physical well-being, please connect however you can, and I can do what I can as well to seek support to get out of those really, really fearful situations. We are talking about here in these presentations the type of fear that has kind of an entrenched quality, whether it's neurological or habitual, and how there are. Neuroscience and neuropsychologists have taught us there are ways we can diminish and reframe these. Thank you for letting me clarify that. The other thing we do is we tend to overlearn from negative experiences. That's also a byproduct of the legacy of our nervous system. It's common that when a bad thing happens, we just don't ever want to do that again, and we overlearn from it. And it's often called learned helplessness. And if you've had pets, or in my case, lots of dogs, you may know what I mean by that. An example with a pet dog, for example, would be, say there's a big windstorm and blows through the window, slams a door, also knocks over a vase, making a big sound. That dog may, for some reason, because of that event, now have a learned helplessness and will never go into that room where the scary door slammed shut and the vase crashed, or whatever it may be. And it takes a long time to reframe a mind that has a helplessness quality to it. So we overlearn from the negative. And so this is an opportunity to recognize when we can then begin to learn more from the positive, that it means we have to enhance our awareness for when these positive sensations and opportunities are being present. We also tend to remember information about people or situations that are negative rather than the more positive ones. And this is, again, part of that overlearning from the negative experiences. Again, once we are aware of this, then what can we do? Well, we know if we focus on all the many, perhaps minor experiences throughout our day where there are positive sensations associated with them, we then try to anchor in those positive sensations, giving them just a bit more staying power in our brains to rewire them, to lay down another thread in our tapestry, so to speak, of a sensation of lasting well-being. And we do this all moment by moment. So what a lot of people I hear, and I appreciate, they might just say, I'm just this way. So whether it's this evolutionary legacy or not, or maybe it's a combination of some habitual tendencies we may have that we've just learned throughout our lives, and we think these are the lenses that we can't take off. And we view other world, we react and engage the world from that place. We sometimes find ourselves saying, I am just this way. Anxiousness, stubborn, judgmental. And then this is really the opportunity to say and listen to the other parts of us that kind of know, I am not this way. And so I have this other little note here. It could be your 7-year-old self that's asking you, are you really just this way? Always anxious, always nervous. You get to define what this I am just this way identity sensation is, but we're asking ourselves to ask ourselves, are you really just this way? Or maybe it's your 98-year-old self that's asking, are you really just this way? Kind of looking back at your life going, gosh, you know, you didn't have to be just this way. There could be other voices that come to you. I don't know. I have this going down to the earth. I can't hear the earth. I don't have that gift. I wish so much I did. And if any of you out there are blessed with that, oh my gosh, you are quite fortunate. But I do sometimes sense, for better or worse, that in many ways it's the planet that's asking me, are you really that way? Do you really have to do that action, that choice, that reaction, that tendency, that approach to whatever? Is it really so ingrained in you? Or could you choose something else that maybe a reaction or an action or an inaction that might indeed improve your interconnectedness to other beings and indeed life on planet Earth? Big stuff, I know. If any of you saw the Raptor Love Story presentation, which really kicked off this Your Ardent Nature YouTube channel, it was a presentation highlighting 3 raptor nest sites in the US that I've been monitoring for a number of years. And if you recall this one, apologies if you don't know who I'm talking about here, but you can always check out that video. This one nest site, would this dear young male bald eagle, would he say, I am just this way? Because you saw that presentation, or you've been monitoring this young bald eagle since last year, when last year at this nest site, he became the new partner to a very experienced female bald eagle. And he, was sexually mature, but did not understand what it meant to be a parent at all. And when the ravens came to 2 clutches of eggs they end up having, he didn't even know quite what to do. The ravens did get that clutch. And now 1 year later, this young papa-to-be bald eagle is a rock star. He is incubating. Sometimes he'll just look at Thunder, the female, when she comes to the nest, saying, no way do I want to get up. These are my eggs. I mean, and we are on pip watch right now. Pip watch means that we may be seeing one little pip mark in one of the 3 eggs. So I'll follow up on that later, perhaps in a different session. But the point here is, whether it was hormones, which are very powerful drivers in the animal world and the human world as well, triggered him now to get to that maturity that he is very dutiful parent. He understands what these eggs are to some degree, and he certainly will in a day when he has his first chick below him and brings in the first fish to offer that chick. That will be very exciting. But we're using this as a way to just reflect that, maybe we can change in a variety of ways, whether it's mindfulness practices that will then inform our body's well-being, which will potentially shift some of the hormonal output, whether it's cortisol or adrenaline or things that are keeping us kind of locked in stress. There's lots of opportunities. Okay, onward then. Well, I am a social scientist and we do love our Venn diagrams. I will kind of go through this part more quickly. I use variations of this for my resiliency training course. You can check out that on my Ardent Nature website, but I'm particularly offering to groups, organizations on the front lines of environmental and social activism, the champions of progress in environmental conservation, wildlife conservation, and social and environmental justice. So what we do in this idea of reframing fear, the first step is setting our intention. Beloved Jack Kornfield often talks about it as setting the compass of your heart. Now, we kind of need to know whether it's moment by moment what our aspirations are and our intentions, or day by day, week to week, month to month, whatever it may be. But setting that intention is so powerful. Rick Hansen described it as kind of 50% of the legwork in positive personal growth is simply setting the intention. More on that as needed. The second aspect then is growing those inner strengths. So I listed off a whole variety of different types of inner strengths that we can pick from the massive bed of seeds of inner strengths out there. And we get to choose what they are that we want to grow. Focus on them by really identifying the moments we are having that positive experience associated with the inner strength, really creating those opportunities associated with an inner strength, recalling them, and we can also just imagine that moment of confidence and courage. So let's say it is public speaking and you're someone who's very hesitant to do public speaking. Well, bit by bit, more experience by more experience, and acknowledging, I did get through that 2-minute presentation at my work meeting, whatever it may be. Over time, by using our own mind, our own awareness of the positive sensations we want to grow, ends up growing those sensations. And I've lived through this myself. I am the perfect guinea pig for this, and I'll share that in perhaps future presentations. The first time I went to the start shoot with my ski joring dog team, I guarantee you I did not eat for about 2 days prior. And even then I was making multiple trips to the porta potty before I went to the start line. 2 years later, I had even faster, crazier dogs, and I was ready to go and so jazzed up to race in any race I could. And this is the power of allowing the mind to reframe our sensations of fear and doubt and judgment, and actually doing just what I said. The subtitle of these presentations really is about making fear fun. The experiences that were once fearful or you'd feel anxiety over can become positive, certainly more neutral if we choose. Then the third aspect of this is then using the most powerful inner behavior that we have to help us reframe our fear, anxiety, doubt, judgment, envy, and that is self-compassion. And I recognize that the concept of self-compassion still is very new for many of us here in the West. It's been well integrated into psychology in Eastern cultures, particularly those associated with Buddhism for many, many years, but it still is fairly new. Psychological research is telling us, though, that positive self-talk, self-nurturing, self-care, basically talking to yourself as though you're a 7-year-old or your dearest friend. So really reducing the harsh overvocal inner critic, which I talked about earlier. There's a lot of evidence that serves no purpose, but talking to ourselves with support. I'm not talking about Pollyanna, oh, you're the best. That is more the 80s self-esteem approach. We kind of know that doesn't really work so well. I am talking about speaking accurately about the things we've done well, but really changing the tone into one of support, nurture, care, appreciation. And that is a huge component of how we reframe fear, which is why I talk about the courageous heart here. Yes, there are mindfulness practices that help us actually rewire the brain, but it comes from a very courageous heart place where it's coming from love and care for ourselves. So these are integral. Okay, with the Venn diagram, then we always get this fun part in the middle, which is why we love them so much. And I ask here then, what is for you that sweet spot in the middle? What might it mean for you? And in the resilience course that I offer, I often speak about, for me anyway, I think for others, it does involve having this sense of inner peace and then outer action. It's that combination of feeling resourced, peaceful, calm, confident, resilient, and then being able to pursue outer actions on behalf of yourself, your family, your community, innocent beings, the well-being of the planet, what have you. A little bit of a recap here then, saying these things in different ways, because I recognize we all learn and appreciate in different ways. This is the moment by moment process where we're quieting that judgmental mind, which tends to be really activated when our nervous system is really revved up, right? We tend to just judge everything. They're that way, I'm that way, she's that way, put things in boxes, label things. We can quiet that very actively. And it does take practice. These are mindfulness practices. You do not go into a gym suddenly, being able to deadlift 200 pounds or being able to do a pull-up. You do practice on those things. We don't learn to play the ukulele or speak Spanish in just a week. It does take practice. And if we aspire towards these practices by diminishing the I got to, I must, I have to, that harsh critic, but actually treating them more as adventure and discovery, which is kind of integrating my appreciation of the natural world. It's always with a sense of adventure and discovery. If we can kind of make our mindfulness practices have a little bit more of that adventure and less of that, I got to do this, I have to, I must, I think that will serve us in a variety of wonderful ways. And then we continue to return to our heartfelt intention. We are setting that compass of our heart, but sometimes we get off course. So we return to it. What is my intention here? What am I really aspiring to grow and do to feel more alive? One useful practice then, when we are revved up in fear, is to just be quiet and ask of it, okay, this feels really real. I know this feels real. Why? My pulse is increased, right? I can feel a little bit flustered. I can feel things revving up a little bit. So this feels really real. I'm trembling. My hands are shaking. But we ask ourselves, is this really true? So that's where we get back to, or is it exaggerated? Or is this just a habitual tendency? Or am I just reacting as I did when I was 8, when X, Y, or Z happened? But really, right now, I am more inner resource. I am more capable to react in a different way. We find that pause and we ask, okay, this feels really real, because anger, doubt, envy, all these things are real sensations. But just because they feel real, there is the opportunity to then inquire within and ask, is it really true? Do I really feel that envious of that person? Or am I just a little scared right now that I may not also get the promotion one day? You see the difference there? So then we assign, when we find and assign accurate facts that are out there. Again, that would be identifying the resources that you know that you have an aspiration to pursue more inner strengths, that a situation could change, that you are really very capable, just turned out this other person might have been more capable, these types of things. And we cultivate those inner strengths and we offer our self-compassion, as I have mentioned. So fear-based sensations do feel quite real. And then we just are asking, is a sensation true? I am showing these images here because some of you know I am fascinated by when birds fledge from a nest because of the innate instincts, right? The instincts that must be there for a chick to leave for the very first time, coupled with there's got to be some innate natural intelligence, some knowing that this is what I'm meant to do. I am meant to fly. I am meant to leave this nest. I have no interest in living on a nest. I am a bird and I have wings. And I think this kind of parallel is very interesting, and I'm fascinated by it. Now here, if you're looking at the image on the left, that gosling is just about 4 hours old. This was featured in one of the Osprey platforms in my Raptor Love Story presentation, so you can learn more about that later. On the right, we have 2 young hummingbirds who have been on that nest with their mama tending to them for a couple of weeks. And that first one then is flying on the right there for the very first time. We will almost always see an image of a bird fledging in any of my videos of these talks here, because I do what I can when I watch the explore.org cameras to catch this live, or I go back, because you can scroll back 4 hours to witness it. I find this highly, highly inspirational. And yes, little gosling on the left did jump 35 feet down to the ground there, met up with its siblings and its 2 Canada goose parents, and it did waddle off to the nearby pond, happy and well. All right, so inquiring within, is this really real? Am I really feeling anxious due to accurate facts, accurate perception of the situation, about the reality of what is truth in this moment? Or could I be feeling a different way? That inquiring within gives us the opportunity to then choose a more empowered reaction, response, or engagement. Really powerful. Useful then for us to talk about the forms of the not so useful fear that does come from our conditioning, usually our family of origin, or our youth in our culture, whatever that may be for you. And there's lots of forms of this. We're going to talk about a few, but many of them could come out in terms of limiting beliefs, of fear of being different, being rejected, I'm never valued, I have to be a certain way, I'm not good enough. These are, again, some of the lenses that life has just put on us, our experience in life, we now wear, and we don't always know that we can actually remove them. We can choose to be a different way. We don't have to wear the lens of, well, I'm not good enough, so that's why I didn't get the promotion, or whatever it may be. That is actually a choice, and we can put on more empowered sensations, what we might call the guiding belief system, that helps us reframe and diminish these not so useful forms of conditioning. Other not so useful conditioning would include our creation of biases towards individuals, groups, organizations, experiences. There's a whole host of them, but that when we have these biases, when we experience that person or that group, that experience, we tend to just go to what the bias is saying will happen. And we ignore the information that actually refutes that bias, which is plentiful, but we aren't going to look for it. We just tend to go for the reaction that we would expect. So those biases, we try to diminish and reframe and at least be aware of them. Oh, I have a bias towards that neighbor or that organization that I've been trying to partner with for my community project. You can then reframe that but first it requires that first step of enhancing our awareness of how our mind is inclined. And then we can choose to rewire it. Rick Hansen often talks about when life is just out of control, and I recognize that we can get in that state. It happens, life events do accumulate, and we can feel it's out of control, but then fear becomes kind of our default approach, and it doesn't need to be that way. We have inner resources that we can access and cultivate when we're feeling out of control, so that we don't have these constant alarm bells going off in our minds, or that we have this carry around this low-grade anxiety. We really do not have to be that way. There is a way to reframe our approaches so that we aren't feeling constant sense of anxiety. A lot of information, so I'm going to pause here and let our wildebeest friends here from Southern Africa, one of the wildlife cameras, and this fun little cartoon to help us think about these hardwired tendencies. They do intertwine with the habitual tendencies. Okay, so the cartoon is beginning again right now. Okay, I think you get the idea, but you can see it's evidence. I realize we're talking about animals here, but you could put this into the human context, I'm sure, of how our hardwired tendencies, that legacy of the nervous system that kind of anchors us toward the negative, predisposes us to all kinds of threats, combining with our habitual tendencies to for X, Y, and Z, they're often very, very intertwined. Again, allowing our wild friends to really inspire us. Here's two incredibly different situations captured on explore.org webcams that do talk about overcoming fear. And I don't know if they're using their empowered heart to do that. I suspect there's lots of other things going on here. But the point is they have been able to overcome a very hardwired fear-based tendency to do what is necessary to thrive in life. So in the case of the giraffe, they're on the right with this large heart and a blood pressure system that is complicated, but has to do with that tall height of theirs. When they do dip down to drink, there is a threat, a potential, maybe even of passing out. They cannot have their head low like that for very long because of this massive heart and the blood going up to the brain and all the dynamics there. And so it's also a very threatening thing to do, is to be drinking out a water hole. So again, there is these inspirational moments that wildlife have often, and it may not appear to us, it may look like, oh, just drinking, no big deal. But there are potential hazards that this individual could face, but is overcoming the fear bias in order to do what is necessary to thrive and sustain life. On the left is that one of the eagle nests that I do observe. This is in Iowa a couple of years ago where there was a late spring snowstorm. We are all doing what we can to recover from the climate disruptions we have created with our fascination to fossil fuels. I know we are, but it does create a hardship for many of our wildlife neighbors and friends in our communities that are often marginalized in our indigenous communities, for instance, up in Alaska in the United States, and here in the lower 48 as well. Lifestyles that have been so tied to the landscape are being threatened by climate disruptions. Here on this nest, though, this is a fascinating little vignette I want to share. And again, expressing change is always there. It's going to be the most reliable constant. Things change. I'm actually kind of a change junkie now in some ways. I do really enjoy change. But in this situation, the female and the male at this nest did have a clutch of eggs. They were incubating. The storm came. And a couple days later, that male, longtime partner at this nest, disappeared, was later found to have perished. And yet, lo and behold, the female stayed and did incubate the eggs, and another male suitor approached her and she was receptive to it. So in this picture, we're actually seeing the new male incubating eggs that are not his, that he did not fertilize these eggs. And what ended up happening is they successfully fledged 3 chicks, and now this male is the male partner to that female at this nest site. So resilience, change, dealing with really fearful and stressful situations, we can move through them. And I believe wildlife is a constant source of information and inspiration and information about that. Another fun little vignettes about what happens when fear dominates, right? We end up closing ourselves off from all kinds of opportunities. Here's a young water buck heading to a water hole. And what do we have here? We have the crocodile there. Decision-making time. Is it inner-resourced? Different water buck, different water hole, but you get the idea. Eventually, he does go and have a drink. So what happens when fear dominates? There's many, many factors here. I'm going to just list maybe 8 or 9. These are mostly borrowed from Dr. Rick Hansen, who I just admire so much. But we end up fight or flight beyond what is appropriate. We've already talked about the lenses of fear that we can look through, and most limiting beliefs that I discussed earlier. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I have to be perfect. Yeah, I know that one really well. In order to be appreciated, etc. Those are actually limiting beliefs, are just like lenses, and they are fear-based tendencies. This is why I'm so fascinated by fear in Homo sapiens, because so many of our tendencies have that origin of fear. If we can at least release the grips of that a little bit, we really can be empowered. So we find where fear is dominating when we're really revved up. We compare, we judge, we cling really tightly. This is mine, or I want mine. I can't lose this. I can't. We really want to resist change. Often when fear is dominating, we tend to dream more small, or we quit too soon in our aspirations in pursuit of some goal or objective. Fear, as I said, that good fear is really narrow focus, but of course it has to be. It's revving up the bodily functions that's going to save us from a head-on collision with a truck or whatever that may be. So it's very narrowly focused. But what happens when you're narrowly focused? Well, we're not collaborating with more people. We're not looking for new and different insights, experiences, information. We tend to be more overly cautious. And it does stifle our creativity when we're trapped in fear. And right now on this planet, the social environmental problems are so complex. So many wonderful organizations are trying to work through them or provide lasting solutions, but they're so complex that we actually will benefit from releasing our grips of fear in working on these problems. In a lot of difficult ways, I recognize, because they're urgent. We're in crisis mode in some areas for certain. But by releasing our tendencies to acquire and use fear-based approaches, we are then allowing really wonderful things to happen. We'll collaborate more and we'll become more creative. And we'll allow those creative minds to find solutions that right now aren't even on our radar screen if we are caught up in fear. And this is why we are offering Your Ardent Nature. Really, this is the fundamental core objective, is to release our grips of fear so we may pursue wholesome, heartfelt aspirations on behalf of all beings from a new, empowered place. I have no way of knowing what that will be, but I feel utterly confident that it'll be from a place of collaboration, creativity, inner resources, more growing of inner resources that may empower us, and we will come up with solutions that right now we can't even imagine. And I find that very inspiring, and I am incredibly hopeful for that. Another wonderful example from our wildlife friends, the watering holes are such a wonderful place to see the interactions. And yes, this is a great example that we can coexist despite our fear-based hardwired tendencies. So I don't know for sure if this is an eagle owl in South Africa. I don't know my eagle owls there very well, but you can imagine that a scrub hare might be normal prey for a large owl. But and yet they're both at this watering hole doing just fine together. So let's recap this whole notion of embracing fear with our courageous hearts, showing some puffins from Seal Island. Again, thanking the wildlife conservation organization there, Steve Kress, the lead wildlife biologist, ornithologist, who really, he and his team, we can credit the return of puffins to this area. There is a fake little puffin in this screenshot here towards the front, and this little guy, Manny, the mannequin puffin, has helped over the years attract puffins. And if you notice this puffin landing here, the image will repeat in just a second. It's like it's sticking its landing. Look how proud it is. It's like the gymnast, Simone, what is her last name? The famous gymnast. Anyway, it's sticking the landing, and just so wonderful to see that. So we are, to recap here, where we're changing our relationship to fear, offering self-compassion to whatever sensation is arising. So I'm feeling doubt about something. Well, that's a fear-based sensation. I'm feeling envious of my sister. Well, that's a sensation. I'm feeling judgment about those other people. Well, that's a fear-based sensation as well. When we are releasing the grips of fear, we tend to really not be so much in doubt and judgment and anxiety. It's really quite a wonderful way. And self-compassion, how we talk to ourselves in a positive way, anchoring in accurate facts about our innate abilities and our aspirations to grow other strengths, talking to ourselves as though we are the 7-year-old with honesty. We're not playing Pollyanna, just fluff everything up kind of thing, but we're really doing what we can to anchor in the reality so that we can feel fed by life rather than drained by it. And when I say fed by life, I do mean all the joys and wonders, the experiences we're really enthusiastic about. But I'm also talking about the bumps in the road as well. Disruption, upset, disturbance, betrayal, sorrow, and loss, they are part of the human existence. But rather than resisting them and pushing up against them, if we can allow ourselves to embrace them with our hearts and many practices we can offer, then those experiences actually in many ways can feed our growth. They may not be easy at times or over time, but they can feed our growth. And Rick Hansen once said to me in an email communication, And I shared to him a personal experience I had. He did say, Ellen, sometimes our greatest sorrows can be our greatest gifts. I will never forget that. And he nailed it for me dead on. So we can have a really tragic trauma, loss, grief, hardship inform us and inspire us in ways we may not know. And that allows us then to anchor in our sense of aliveness, cultivate those inner strengths that I've been talking about. And then we feel more empowered to offer our gifts, whatever they may be, for ourselves, our aspirations for ourselves, our community, our regions of the planets. We can do all of that. A lot here. So we're going to wrap up this presentation and we'll save kind of the next steps, the more nitty gritty on what we can do with the fear-based tendencies, how we reframe fear, maybe a bit more step-by-step approach. It's a big topic. Yeah, it's about 10 chapters in a book, a manuscript I'm working on that I call Loving Earth, Fearless and Free. That's from one of the wonderful quotations of the Dalai Lama, speaking on the notion of when we're motivated by love, the more fearless and free our actions can be. That really sense of empowerment, that we're motivated by love in our choices, our decisions, our actions, and our inactions. Love for ourselves, communities, innocent beings. It is possible. And we will explore that next time on Your Ardent Nature in part 2 of the Power of Our Courageous Hearts to Reframe Fear. Close with our typical closing slide here for these features, asking, as I do, to what do you offer your ardent nature, your passionate nature? Yes, if you say I'm offering it to myself, that is wonderful. If you're offering it to some group, an hour a month, that's great too. You get to decide, but we're recognizing that each of us do have innate skills and abilities, and we can pursue our wholesome, heartfelt aspirations moment by moment, day by day, cultivate our inner strengths in the flow of everyday life. It doesn't mean going to the gym and doing your types of exercises that eventually allow you to do a pull-up. And having been a gym instructor, there's nothing more exciting than seeing someone do their first pull-up or their first pull-up in many years after 6 weeks of preparing to do so. So we can cultivate these inner strengths. It is very doable. And we enhance our awareness of our reactive tendencies, our habitual tendencies, and we actively reduce those that are no longer serving us. We've looked at those lenses. I am really not just this way. I may have been that way before, very anxious, judgmental, whatever it may be, but I'm now recognizing that's not fully serving me, my loved ones, my community, however you want to put that, and I'm going to reduce that tendency in a proactive way. And if one is so inclined, offer those gifts. Well, thank you for your kind attention. Reach out as best you can or when you want to, and stay tuned for the next segment on embracing fear with our courageous hearts coming soon. Thank you for your kind attention and be well.